We are all reeling from news about price spikes as well as shortages of key commodities. The latest data shows just how bad things are in chemicals and steel, two very important commodities. But perhaps there is a glimmer of hope. Welcome to Global Sourcing Insights from CIPS. This edition is co-produced by CIPS Americas and the Michigan State University Broad College of Business. I'm Bob Rossback. The data we will be looking at are primarily recent releases from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Federal Reserve Board, so they're very credible sources. And here to explain it all is Jason Miller, Associate Professor in the Broad College of Business at Michigan State. Welcome, Jason.
Well, thanks for having me on, Bob.
Excellent. So let's look at a commodities price chart, especially for steel. It's quite a shocker there. Now, is this primarily because of a comparison to a 10-year low at the start of the pandemic, or is something else going on?
So really, we've had a combination of a few things. And one has been, once the pandemic hit, we saw a substantial reduction in steel capacity. Several of the legacy mills, the old blast furnaces, were deactivated. For example, the Hamtramck facility here in Michigan. And then we obviously had a very strong rebound of demand, especially for durable goods, automobiles, washing machines, and things like that. And so you've got capacity down, demand is up, and what's going to happen? Well, prices rise. And we've seen tremendous increase right now. So right now we're at over 100% higher pricing for domestically produced steel than where we were in January 2021. Now, the good news, if you can call it good news, is that year-over-year increase is down from the peak, which was in November 2021, where prices were up 142% above where they were in November of 2020. Now, obviously, one thing many people are probably thinking about is, what role do the tariffs play, and also the recently announced quotas, typically about 3 million tons of steel. That will certainly help, but the U.S. consumes, probably around 100 million tons, give or take, of steel in a given year. And so these amounts that we're talking about being essentially tariff-free through quotas are really a drop in the bucket.
Okay. So when you look at the charts and from media reports, it does look like that steel companies have taken mills offline. I know there's been a couple in Michigan, actually. So at the level of 75 or 80% capacity, will steel mills be able to sustain the prices they are getting right now?
So it does seem the pricing is going to go down over the coming months. The question is how far, but especially for companies that are, waiting on steel, the fact that we have utilization from the Census Bureau that's really about as high as we've been over the past 6 or 7 years is telling you you're not going to suddenly see dramatically shorter lead times. And the one thing to keep in mind is the Federal Reserve Board's data, which is coming from the American Iron and Steel Institute, is showing that output is still well below 2018 levels, which in turn is actually below 2014 and 2012 levels. And so if anything, we've been sort of on a secular downward trend towards of steel production over the past 10 years. And so the real question now is going to be, as we see capacity come online with facility expansions completing and new mini mills going up and coming active in late 2022, early 23, what will that do for pricing? Because each of those mini mills is about a 3 million ton of steel output a year.
So bottom line, the price situation may improve some over the next year, but don't hope for a miracle.
Yeah, so I would say price situation should improve, but for folks who are, waiting for pricing to go back to 2019 levels, I certainly wouldn't be holding my breath. So hopefully we can see pricing maybe get down to, half of the increase that we've seen. If we could see that, it certainly is going to help, but I think we're in for a period of inflated steel prices for the coming months.
Let's move to chemicals and resins. This is chemical and allied product pricing. We see the prices going down 2 years before the pandemic, then skyrocket up to the end of last year. And the production trend lines more or less follow, dropping steadily between 2018 and 2020, then going up with some big bounces. We'll get to those later, but overall, it's not that big a change from a 10-year average. So what's going on?
Yeah, so in the chemical basic chemicals as well as plastic resins, which for those of you familiar with any manufacturing process, we can't make anything without basic chemicals or really without plastic resins. I mean, that is an input into so many products. What we've seen, especially on the resin front, has been a substantial price spike, really since the pandemic. That was made substantially worse by the fact we had the February 2021 polar vortex, which hit Texas and Louisiana, which produced a tremendous amount of our plastic resins. Probably at least 50% would be the ballpark estimate based on government data. And so we lost essentially 25% of our overall output in February 2021, and we were still down 15% output in March of 2021. And so we're just still digging out of essentially the plastic resin hole that we dug with those shutdowns, and our output is still substantially below where it was in 2018. On the chemical, on the more basic chemical side of things, we've seen a substantial increase in prices. However, that is not really what I would call an unprecedented price spike, because it really sort of takes us back to where we were in 2011, 2012, which was a time period where you had a substantial run up in oil prices. Should sound familiar to today. And so if you look at chemical pricing, it very much is going to be following what's going on in the oil sector. So we had appeared to see some stabilization before, as of January, but now with the Ukraine situation and oil futures, Brent's approaching 100 a barrel, West Texas intermediaries like 92 or 93 as we speak right now. That certainly isn't going to bode well for chemical pricing, seeing a substantial decline as we move throughout the year.
So no real good news there, actually.
Not as much as I would like. I mean, previous to the Ukraine situation, I would have been feeling a little bit better, but that's the new inflation wild card right now, is because of the price of oil. Obviously, the price of wheat is going to be likely going up because Ukraine's a huge wheat exporter. The price of soybeans will be going up because Ukraine is the largest producer of sunflower oil, which is one of the largest edible oils in the world, which now means you'll have more demand for soybean oil instead. And so when you start factoring all of this in, the Ukraine crisis will cascade and affect us, many industries in many indirect ways. Chemical pricing will be affected through any effects on oil, and those energy prices in turn are going to get passed on through, or a big role in steel prices. So the inflationary picture 3 weeks ago looked better than it does today, unfortunately.
Going back to the chemical and allied product production chart, and you see that giant dip as the winter storms knocked out capacity in Texas and Louisiana. That's what you were talking about. So, is there a lesson to supply managers in that big drop?
Yeah. So one thing you see when you look at chemicals and resins is the fact that so much of our production is geographically concentrated. One lesson I would say is take a very close look how you're setting safety stocks for these products. And the reason I say that is we set safety stock really assuming sort of normal variation of events, normal variation of lead time, normal variation of demand. But when we're talking things like a polar vortex, these are extreme events. And the concern is that you may not be holding the type of safety stock you need if you're having those type of extreme events. And this is where, as a procurement manager, you need to start be asking yourself, what is my price of storing additional, safety levels of this versus what is my price if I'm starting to stock out, having to shut down my plants? And in most instances, the answer is, holding a few extra days or, even a week or two of safety stock may be a worthwhile investment, because when you take a look at plastic resins or basic chemicals, you can look in this chart and you can see Hurricane Katrina in 2005 tremendously disrupts chemicals. Move forward, Hurricane Harvey in 2017, the polar vortex in February of 2021. Notice those last two events occurred much more quickly back to back than what we had before. And so as we're talking extreme weather events, all it takes is a serious hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, and we're at, production declining 15, 20, 25% again. And so I think one lesson that we have to take away from COVID is really rethinking how do we plan for extreme events. And for some commodities, especially those that are not going to, go bad with time, do we have to hold more safety inventory to essentially hedge against these, more extreme events?
Okay. So we have wild card events, Ukraine, weather crises, weather disasters. How about a not so wild card, the Federal Reserve? They are now making increasing signals that they will tighten money supplies over the next year or more. So, how do we factor those into our equations?
So I think that, and obviously the tightening of things and raising interest rates is due to the strong inflationary effects. I don't see really much downside at the moment. Unfortunately, I think the inflationary situation has just been substantially underestimated from the start. And the situation in the Ukraine just makes it, if anything, even more urgent to find ways to tamp down on things. I don't think the economy is so fragile that it will go into a recession if we have substantial price hikes. And so I think that we don't need to worry too much about the hikes from a standpoint of, will this perhaps put us in a recession? In terms of the effect that it could have on curtailing capital investment, right now I'm not so sure, given all the uncertainty, how much companies want to investing in durable assets anyway at this moment in time. And so I'm not sure that we'll have much of a muting effect. And also I think it's important to keep in mind that the effective federal funds rate is practically zero right now. So raising at 50 basis points gives us 0.5% effective federal funds rate. We're not talking about a situation, back in the 1990s, we had a great economy with a 5% effective federal funds rate. And so my statement would be is if people talk about having a robust economy, it's can we have 4% interest rates with that, or a 4% effective federal funds rate and things still keep operating. So I think that really should be the Fed's long-term goal, is to be able to get interest rates back to a level where we can actually make money, putting it in the savings account, and hopefully still have an economy that's functioning well.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your insights, Jason. That's all we have time for. This has been Global Sourcing Insights from CIPS. I'm Bob Rossback. Have a good day.